social enterprise is kind of a summary of what we've heard, mixed with, I guess, just like a general summary of the state of some things at the moment. I guess I feel like I always try and make presentations a bit interesting because I sometimes struggle sitting through long presentations. So I've included like musical influences and opinions and things from people that I admire and look up to. So I guess it's, yeah, hopefully going to be a bit different and engaging. But yeah, um, so I guess it's kind of a bit of a provocation. A lot of it is about demonstrating things that exist or things that maybe we could do in order to kind of get feedback and comments about what direction the network should go in as a whole. And my background, I studied and worked in design first, and then did a master's in sustainability, design, and entrepreneurship. So I feel like the design thinking side of things has always stayed with me. And at the core of that is how you find out what the problems are before you try and solve them. So I guess the discovery sessions being social enterprise has been a lot of what actually are the issues, the things holding the sector back, and then looking at how to solve them. And I feel like I also take a lot of influence from nature and natural systems. So there'll be a lot of that in there in terms of metaphors and ways of thinking about things. So I wanted to start by talking about like a bit of context and background, and like viewing social enterprise as a sort of as a movement in terms of how people can reclaim power and keep the power and prevent resource extraction in their communities. And so I've included some clips of people talking about it, which I guess are probably outside of the mainstream, but these are the people that I listen to, and I think they're interesting perspectives to share.
I used to watch sound clashes in Jamaica and Yard. There's like a sound system, my brother. One man's job is to just make jerk chicken. And next man's job is probably just to bring the speakers. And next man's job is to DJ. And next man's job is to turn up and create the vibe, grab the mic. That sort of chemistry amongst a group of people where we all have different jobs, but they're all important. I'm in love with that. I want to create that on a bigger stage and inspire people to do economy. I want to inspire people to create their own ecosystem where, like we had in Ferry Lane, we all went to this, we had our barber, we had the football pitch that we all went to, we had our own pub, we had a laundrette. We're just self-sufficient.
And yeah, I guess that's the thing I feel like is kind of the aim is you want to not have all the resources and all the money taken out of the community. You want to keep it circulating. And like I guess also something that's come up is like the tendering process and people like tenders going to nationals who aren't really rooted in the community because they have the scale. And I guess it's that thing of how do we make sure that we're collaborating so that we can keep the resources in the community and stop them getting extracted. And I guess the potential of social enterprise, I think is best summed up by this is an interview with George the Poet on Channel 4 News. I think he sums it up really well about the opportunity that lies in social enterprise and the ways of doing things differently, especially when there's eroded faith in institutions and like government bodies.
On the ground.
But I suppose what I mean is if that white people's government, as you call it, is held in contempt by white people right now, and it's held as irrelevant by your community, is there a bigger danger, actually, about sort of disintegration?
Maybe there's just a big opportunity. Maybe there's an opportunity because people are not stupid. When I say the white people government, I'm not saying that there's something defective within white people or, people outside of that circle. I'm just calling it like it is, right? I could also call it the southeastern government, right? I could call it all of these titles that connote all the ways in which it is exclusive and inaccessible. But ultimately, in the spaces beyond that, exclusivity, there's innovation. There are creative people, there are good-natured people, there are good people trying to do good work day in and day out without any thanks or recognition, or really without the remuneration that would make their time worth it. Now, perhaps there's another way to take control over the sentiment in our communities, the ways in which we're sharing information and enacting change on the ground that just completely renders the Bojos of the world irrelevant.
Yeah, I guess that kind of brings us to, well, what's the role of Sen in order to kind of make those conditions for the network to thrive and to be able to share information and like distribute resources effectively. And I guess I speak to Terry about this a lot in terms of seeing Sen as a mycelial network in that the resources flow to the places they're needed most because everyone's connected. And I guess that's kind of the goal for Sen, is to create a active network which kind of adapts to the situations and like flows the resources to where they need to go. And I guess at the moment, like the spoken hub model, where, for example, people would come to Sen for advice, and then Sen kind of would act as, I don't know, the gatekeepers or like distributing this information on a business by business basis. But we kind of want to move to a model where everyone's interconnected and people can help each other. I think both because in terms of realisticness, Sen is 3 full-time employees, and I guess it's not really possible to, that model doesn't seem very sustainable. Like, we can be stewards of the network and facilitate, but I guess it needs to become an active network where everyone's in touch with each other, and the resources can kind of go to where they're needed. Where there's a surplus, that can go to an area where there's a deficit. And I think, I mean, I haven't been in Sheffield too long, so I'm wary of, I mean, like thinking I know too much, but like there are some things that, like for example, there's a bit of a north-south divide that I've noticed, and it's like, well, where there's a surplus, where can that be redirected to more deprived areas? Where can different communities exchange resources? And I guess, yeah, that's the kind of aim in our thinking at the moment. And I forgot to say at the start as well, I did say the provocation thing, but if there's any comments on any of this, or like as we're going through, you want to leave comments in the chat, that's great. Obviously, we can talk at the end as well. But I guess the whole thing is presenting these ideas, being like, okay, this is what we've heard and this is our thinking. But like, obviously, we have our own biases, we have our own opinions, but we want to make decisions that would reflect what the network actually wants and how the network feels. So I guess onto the Sega program and like the diagnostic side of things. So far it's been 98 discovery sessions. So it's like an hour and a half sitting down speaking to businesses. They haven't all been done by me, but many of them have. And looking about, I think that number might have increased, but around 112 people have signed up to the Sega program. And I guess a brief summary, like of those, I don't think that's the most visible graphic, but of those, it's quite split in terms of like sectors. So for example, like arts, music, creative, sport, health, well-being, environmental sustainability, like business support services, housing, community. It's quite like an even split, it seems, at the moment. And similarly, in terms of like the business stage, it looks like more or less even between startup, established, pre-start, scale up. So it's like quite a even diverse group of businesses in terms of size and sector. Before I get into like the main things that have come out of those diagnostics, I just wanted to share. It's a song that I think kind of encapsulates, well, I feel it encapsulates a lot of some of the changes that need to be made. And I thought also it's like makes things more interesting rather than me just talking all the time. So
the word of the tens was culture, but in this decade, the word is community still. Togetherness wins. There's way too many things that the lack of community kills. Yeah, we're good on our own, but together we're strong. We need more community skills. We need to team up more. Each one teach one so the community builds. Asking for help is hard, but a lot of us struggled and nearly died on that hill. And if you relate, then you've got a duty to make sure that's a thing nobody else feels. Artists need communities, so without people, then you're just gonna stand still. And if you don't help others, who's gonna help you? Now you have to swallow that pill. Being alone is cool, but when you're together, then it ain't as hard to go far. If you ain't got like-minded people around you, then it's gonna make it hard. I know protecting your energy is key, but it's tiring when you're always on guard. How you gonna build these relationships with people if you don't give them a chance and a one-dimensional view of what friendship means only serves to keep us apart? You can't connect with people if you always keep them at the length of an arm. Community takes so many forms, but you never know until you're deep in the dark. And it's never too late to form new connections. All you gotta do is just start. If you wanna see this thing of ours grow, then we gotta start sharing the resources. too. If you got equipment, somebody needs them, borrow them that if it ain't being used. I ain't saying give out your things carelessly, my G, don't get confused, but the thing that's sitting in your locked at home might just solve somebody else get through. When I say share the resource, it ain't only things, I mean information too. Sharing the gems don't cost you a thing, plus other people want to learn from you. Link with your people and trade ideas, and in return you see alternate views. Peer-to-peer feedback's priceless when you've got an idea that you're trying to improve. When you're alone, you go quick, but together, you go the farthest. Ecosystems are important. People power is like stardust. We need people, connect others, share the resource, don't guard it. If in doubt, just remember it takes a village to raise an artist. When you're alone, you go quick, but together, you go the farthest. Ecosystems are important. People power is like stardust. We need people, connect others, share the resource, don't guard it. If in doubt, just remember it takes a village to raise an artist.
So yeah, out of the diagnostics, these are kind of the main things identified in terms of like what either problem areas or areas that there is potential to improve. So I'll go into each of them in a bit more detail. The first is exchanges, and I guess the role in centers that is developing the infrastructure in order to be able to share the resource and like act as like create platforms for exchange. Like some common issues are like, how do we secure larger funding opportunities and contracts and tenders and like the bigger pots? And I guess when it's a small business, it can be difficult to access those pots, both because of like the scale of the business, but also like knowing what they're looking for, because it seems like it's a bit a different ball game. And so, for example, how could we create exchanges or platforms so that people could collaborate in order to access those pots? And I guess also like capacity is an issue, and again, like the funding side of things and the bids. Obviously, if you add that up across the sector and the competition for all the bids, and like it's duplication of efforts and a lot of time wasted across the sector, that potentially by sharing knowledge, by collaborating on things, we could potentially reduce that overall and kind of increase the capacity of the sector. So I don't know, things like having a needs wants board or like an in-person needs wants session where you can match the skills you have or the resources you have with other people who want them and trade. Things like helping with frameworks for impact reports, methodologies, templates, and cross-sector collaboration. And I guess, yeah, also there's a lot of obviously startups, as you saw from the graphic before, it's kind of equal to the amount of established businesses. And I guess exchanges can also be in the form of mentorship and helping the startups not have to go through all the hurdles you went through, and kind of reducing the barriers for them. And I guess, so like the picture you can see on the left is an example of this already exists. It's a website called thewhitepube.com, and they have a library of past applications for grants. A lot of it's like Arts Council grants, but people upload them and you can go and see. So for example, you could go and search, I want to see how people got grants of £200,000 or more. And you can go and filter and then kind of look at those grants, if they were successful, and like learn from that. And I guess that already exists. I'm not saying Sen should maybe duplicate that, but in order to, maybe the more relevant thing would be creating a platform where people can say, oh, I want to apply for this grant, I'm not big enough, who else would like to? And that could exist both as like an online tool or like an offline tool. And I'll come to the offline side of things a bit more later. But just simple things like that in terms of like connecting people in order to achieve access to bigger things. And I guess the first step in that is sort of, which I guess we're at the point in the Sega program now where we can create groups around sectors or regions or beneficiaries so that people can start having these conversations with other people that they should or could be working with. So this exists as well. So this is kind of compiled a list of all the social enterprises we're aware of or work with, kind of just giving them a brief tag. Some of them aren't right because it's just like AI made it a lot quicker. But for example, having access to a directory where you can look up and say, oh, like who is working in the arts, who's working in music, who's doing stuff with circular economy, and then you can find them, and that's an easy route to collaborating. And I think I'll demonstrate a bit more after, but I think the further work on that is like a larger piece of work in terms of mapping not only this, but also the networks and the networks of networks and how they all link to each other to kind of co-create like a map. So like people know where to go, people know who's doing what, and it'll be easier to facilitate that exchange. And similarly, looking into how we might create an online sort of platform for that collaboration and for asking questions and sharing information. Set up a Discord channel. I've been a member of a Discord channel before called Precious Plastic, and that was really useful for me at the time when I was working doing plastic recycling and design, because I could go on and ask questions about molds, about how where people are selling their products, and kind of exchange information that way. Whether we stick with Discord as a platform is still we're not too sure on, but it will just allow, for example, you could have you see regional channels where you can connect with other people in your local area, channels by sector, so you can chat to anyone who's doing sport, wellbeing, health, and also just like things like a showcase, like sharing the good things that you're doing, because I think that's another issue that's come up is lack of awareness in what other people do in the sector, and also just lack of public awareness and inspiration for carrying on doing the work that you're doing. So the next sort of main thing is about access and transparency. Like people want to help themselves, but it can be hard to find out what rooms you should be in, who the right contacts are, and like knowing who to go to. And I guess what I think in terms of like democratizing access to this sort of information, I think Sen definitely has a role to play in sort of mapping it out. And I guess the first thing which will, I think, come after this is the Sen sort of wiki that we've started to build, and I'll touch on that on the next slide. But essentially it's, yeah, trying to answer these questions, but without people having to email like us individually, wait for a reply. I feel like we shouldn't be the gatekeepers of that information. So I guess what we'd want to do is find out that information and try and co-create with like the Sen staff obviously contributing, but everyone in the network contributing, directors, the associates all contributing knowledge to a sort of pool to just save everyone time in terms of like who is responsible for this, where do I need to go? And if I'm right, so yeah, this is the sort of Sen portal that has been, so yeah, I think it's a link to it, so hopefully it will open. Oh dear, that's not gone right. I'm not sure what's going on your screen, but my screen is misbehaving. So can someone give me a thumbs up if they can sort of see a web page? Or is it, yeah? Okay, here we go. So this is kind of what it looks like at the moment. Obviously, you've got the Sega program info, like all the FAQs, the grant application guidelines, everything. And then this is the directory that I showed earlier where you can kind of search to find social enterprises to collaborate with. At the moment, we've kept any personal information off there. It's just like organization tag. That's it for the time being. But that is going to be replaced by something built into the Sen website quite soon, where people can like add profiles to their own organization, and that should be a bit more of a thing. But then this is in terms of sharing information, you kind of started with, so these are like tips on if you're trying to find leases or spaces. It's like information, links, places you can go, other social enterprises who offer space, that kind of thing. And I guess the idea with all of this is obviously we've put this together ourselves, but we want people to add things to all the pages and add their own pages to kind of build a Wikipedia of information for social enterprises. So yeah, you've got the inquiries, points of contacts, you've got the videos we've commissioned around topics that have come up from the diagnostics by the consultants. Like these will be added to as like we identify more problem areas and kind of create content for that. And then, do you know what I mean, useful things on legal structures in terms of choosing legal structure, the information on all those, which is useful for startups. And yeah, so that's kind of the idea behind the wiki. It's essentially a specific to social enterprise in Sheffield Wikipedia. And that I'm hoping will help people have a sort of self-service approach to getting the information they need. And then I guess in terms of more radical provocations, like what if there was, I mean, all the people are often like, where is the funding? Where's it going? Why is X organization getting funding? And how much is actually available? It's like, well, what if we were able to map or visually show where the funding is going and how much is available? And like, what would that change? Like, how would that change behavior? Having that radical transparency. Catherine, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that portal wiki thing that you showed us, when will we have access to it?
So
is that something that's in development, or?
I mean, in its current state, it's live. It's just just waiting basically for this session to get some feedback before sending out the link completely. And there's a decision to make around what platform to use in terms of like an actual messaging or communication system. But like, yeah, it's ready and has been ready for a little bit of time, but it's more just a finishing touches kind of thing. So I imagine within the next week, 2 weeks after getting some feedback.
Great, thank you.
Cool. So the next thing, which I guess is quite obvious, is resources and help. Obviously, reliance on grant funding is, I'm sure everyone sort of has as it becomes less and less available, it creates kind of strains and the need for diversifying sources of income, especially beyond like initial startup grants. There seems to be a bit of a gap between the initial and then like the larger pots. So I guess in terms of strategizing, creating streams and accessing those larger opportunities, that's kind of been a problem for a lot of social enterprises. And I guess, yeah, the relying on volunteers and just being overstretched, not being able to do certain things because like there's just always a more immediate priority and constraints on time. So I guess it's, yeah, how as a sector can we increase the capacity by like preventing some duplication of effort? And then onto space, that's something that's come up quite a lot, is like a lack of affordable space for either like operations, public facing sessions, or co-working space. And that's both like short-term and like long-term growth premises, how to find them. Some people have trouble finding them, or when they find them, they're already like gone in an instant, or just like aren't able to find out where they are. And I guess that's why the put together that Notion page with some useful tips on that. But I guess from a SEN perspective, it's like having a physical space would be a good breeding ground for ideas and for facilitating this collaboration. I think it's important to obviously have the online, but also the offline, be able to meet people face to face, being able to collaborate. And while we want to create like these subgroups by sector or region or beneficiaries, I think those subgroups meeting in person, or having the option at least to have a space to meet in person, is something quite important. And I spent some time in Rotterdam recently, and there was a building there called Worm, and it made me think about youth and youth clubs and the youth aspect of social enterprise. For example, when I was 15, because I grew up in London, and there was an organization called Somewhere Too, and I wanted to start my own business. It was a t-shirt printing business. And I was able to go to this organization, and they were able to find me space to be able to print the t-shirts. And that allowed me to develop that thing. And I guess another aspect, I think, of SEN that would be good to develop is to create those sort of spaces for the next generation, and not necessarily just for the activities and resources, but to get mentoring from people who are doing it right now in more established businesses. Yeah, and I just thought that was worth sharing, because it's a great place. They have the building, sort of, they own it on like one night every week and can start whatever projects they want and collaborate with other young people. So in the short term, we've identified a meanwhile use space and got like a plan agreement in place and should have some news on it soon. And that will be, I guess, like a short-term solution in terms of offering subsidized space for social enterprises to host events. So like public-facing events where people can't find a space to host it. It's kind of facilitating that and addressing that need in the short term. And in the long term, we want to investigate like a social enterprise hub, like a more ambitious project. And I guess it's imagining like what that would be, what that would need to offer. Yeah, a place to congregate, teach, like share, learn, and host events. And also, yeah, like things like, would it be useful to have a library? Would it be useful to have event space, outdoor space, cinema space? Well, yeah, I guess what would that future sort of hub for social enterprise look like? What would people want it to be like? And I guess the last thing is that there's some, I guess, addressing contradictions and why, for example, the Sega program or the organizations who engage with SEN are not necessarily representative of the whole of Sheffield, and like really figuring out why that is. Like, and I don't know the answers. I don't think we do, but I think finding out why that is and how to engage with all of everyone is kind of a priority. And there are many reasons why it could be, but I feel like we need to do some work in finding out why that is and then addressing the concerns to make that change. And it's not really a matter of altruism. I think I always draw on the link between biodiversity and like gut diversity, and because that improves, like, for example, if a area is more biodiverse, I mean, I did my dissertation on this, if an area is more biodiverse or more perceived to be biodiverse, it has stronger mental health benefits. It's like it's more resilient to climate change. And the same with gut diversity. If you have a more diverse gut bacteria, your immune system is stronger. And I think that analogy kind of works across all things. If you have a more diverse community, you're resilient, you're more adaptable. And so I think addressing why maybe that's not the case in certain sectors, I think is quite important. And then a few contradictions around like I mean, just things I've noticed, for example, like some people, like, are people really helping, or is it sales disguised as help? Things about matched funding kind of being a barrier for a lot of people. And I know for the Sega grant, the match funding thing was removed, and I'm glad it was, because it does definitely present a barrier in terms of being able to afford. I say remove, sorry, remove for startups rather than established businesses, because it does represent a barrier to accessing that help. And I guess the other thing, and this may be more of a personal gripe, but I think the effect of all the reporting and monitoring that a lot of programs or organizations have to do, and the trickle down effect on how it impacts the ability to actually do the work. I think, I mean, I in my role, I've tried to automate as much as I can, but like maybe that's something that would be useful in terms of teaching or like sharing tools for automating things to be able to free up more time for actually doing the work, because I think it can have quite a big impact on how much time and resources you actually have to do the things that you're trying to, when you're trying to serve people. And the final thing is the need for stories and inspiration. I think there's a bit of I speak to people outside of the social enterprise, and I'm still surprised by the amount who don't know what social enterprise is. And I guess that's a public thing. And I think in terms of increasing the visibility of the network as a whole and what social enterprise is, but also social enterprises being unaware of other social enterprises, even though there's the desire to connect and collaborate, they just don't know who is working in the same sector, who's working in the same field. And I mentioned earlier about the directory and the change to the SEM website. I think hopefully that should address some of the like internal visibility, but I guess exploring how we can improve public awareness, celebrating triumphs like food diagnostics. I've heard like amazing stories of things people have done, and I feel like they should be shared. Like it's inspiration for other people to go out and do similar things. And like, what would that look like? Is that like a regular publication? Is that like a piece of documentary work, like going around Sheffield and sort of highlighting all the social enterprises? And then things like, in terms of like public facing, what if there was a social enterprise gift voucher? So you could give someone that and they can spend it with any social enterprise, for example. And I guess in terms of the public side of things as well and business to business stuff, a lot of people have expressed interest in working with corporates, but they don't know how to approach the corporates, or they don't know, they're struggling to find corporates who are interested, or those kind of issues as well. What if we created a sort of directory or a marketplace where businesses looking to do CSR could come and see, okay, these are lots of social enterprises that we could work with. These are, if they want to improve their like ethical purchasing or ethical trades, they could, and they wanted to use venues which were social enterprises, they could find venues, they could find, I don't know, accountancy services, they could find all sorts of things which are all social enterprises to kind of improve their corporate social responsibility. And then the same in a public facing domain, like a lot of social enterprises I've spoken to run classes, whether that be fitness, cooking, gardening. There's like physical products, whether that be games, florists, experiences, things like hikes, and like services like music production or engineering. And I think all of these things, I think if a member of the public wanted to know that the money they were spending was going back into the community, doing a good place, like why would they not check this directory before they make the decision on who they're going to go to for something? And I think things like that could be very helpful. And yeah, that's just a mock-up of a magazine and gift voucher. So I guess, yeah, that's kind of the bulk of the presentation. I guess the discussion is, what do you think, essentially? Is it reflective of your thoughts? What would you add? What do you think wasn't so relevant? And I guess I just wanted to say that I think the idea is that we'll be sort of doing this type of thing with regularity, so maybe quarterly, to kind of get a steer of whether we're going in the right direction or not. And I guess in terms of like priorities, like out of what I've discussed, what stood out to you as like this would be really useful, or like, yeah, be good? Because I guess the priority at the moment, from our understanding, is creating the conditions for the collaboration, rather than the old model of maybe like trying to actually do the work ourselves. I think we just need to create the conditions because people are capable and people want to do it. And yeah, that is that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions. Others got a hand up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen it as a
Yeah, John. Yeah.
I guess, like, I was just curious, like, what your, like, there's a lot there. There's all these different pieces of the kind of movement forwards. It's great to see the whole strategy laid out. But I'm just curious, Mike, what you are working on at the moment. Like, what's your sort of first thing here that you're taking as your takeaway from all of that analysis, and say, where are you putting your energy at the moment?
So I guess because the diagnostics have been done since the start of the year when I joined SEN, a lot of the things have kind of just been doing behind the scenes anyway before this point. So the things like going through the information and working out what we should get the associates or consultants to record videos on, putting together that Notion portal in terms of like the first sort of point of access for information. And then I think the Discord, the main thing for me at the moment, obviously to launch the Notion, but then also I think having that constant interaction online, as well as the send space, which is another thing we're like getting ready to hopefully be able to launch soon, is being able to have that online conversation, to be able to just log on and, do you know what I mean, ask questions to people who are in a similar position to you. And I guess the main block in doing that is I'm wary of like asking people to be making accounts for lots of things and like making something that people aren't going to actually use, because it depends, it's the success of it depends on people using it and actually sharing information. So I guess it's kind of a feeler to get the confidence, like, okay, is this something people are interested in before deciding to actually put it out?
Okay, cool. Thanks, man. I use Discord, so you've got one vote.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah,
yeah, sorry, I can't find my hand button, so I'm doing it in the video, so I apologize. Yeah, Mike, thanks for the presentation. And yeah, I'm quite interested just on your topic of space when you was talking about getting space. I was also down in London with a sort of shared workspace that was giving opportunities to sort of startups and entrepreneurs that was working with like smaller businesses, that was also in getting that space, they was actually offering services to the community as well, sort of like a partnership, and it like an inspiration to like those that you've just mentioned. I was wondering what is the procedure in Sheffield for like finding space, and how does that work in terms of like trying to liberate the use for social enterprises, whether it's from a council owned or privately owned area? Does yourself or anyone in the group know any further information about that?
So yeah, I mean, as far as knowing in Sheffield specifically, I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I guess in sourcing that information about other people and putting that page together, I guess that's like a brief overview of the areas, but I'm sure there are people in the network, maybe people in this room, who know specific to Sheffield how that works. I know there's a few, like there's Meanwhile Use Space, which is how Sen have sort of agreed this space, which is where the landlord has to pay business rates anyway, if it's empty or not. So it makes sense for them to allow someone to use the space for free. But in terms of like finding those opportunities, I mean, I'll share the page. I can share it with you now, actually, but basically everything I know is on there. If there's like more specific inquiries, or if that doesn't answer a lot of questions, then I mean, that's where the Discord, I think, would come in handy to be able to like ask it to the community. And if you're on the Sega program, I guess I think Morgan and Shahida can offer help in terms of knowing a bit more specifics, contacts, things like that.
Thanks, Mike.
Does anyone else have any more questions? No? Okay. Thank you so much for attending today. I think following this, Mike did mention that we will be doing these quarterly, and we'll set a date for the next one shortly. But if anyone has any feedback or has any questions that they didn't feel like they want to share with the group, that they want to share with ourselves, just please send me an email or Mike, if you've got Mike's email address. Our next event will be on Friday the 13th of September. We're having a social enterprise social in the Gardeners Rest pub at Neath End. It will be very informal, very relaxed style of networking. We'll provide the nibbles. You just need to buy your own drinks. But yeah, again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And if no one has any more questions, we'll finish it there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very much.
Thank